Beginning of 1915. As early as the end of 1914, the fighting on the Western Front assumed a positional character and the warring parties focused on strengthening their defensive positions. At the beginning of the second year of the war, the German command found itself in a difficult situation, since its plans for the rapid defeat of France could not be realized, and the situation on the Eastern Front was quite complex. The fact is that the Austro-Hungarian army could not cope with the onslaught of the army of the Russian Empire, so there was a high probability that Austria-Hungary would be defeated and the German Empire would lose its main ally. In the current situation, the German command was developing a new plan, which involved the defeat of the Russian army, which was supposed to force the Russian Empire to withdraw from the war. To implement this plan, Germany began transferring the most combat-ready divisions to the Eastern Front, which is why on the Western Front, due to lack of forces, the German army was forced to abandon large-scale offensives and take up defensive positions. The transfer of the most combat-ready divisions to the Eastern Front was no secret for England and France, who decided to take advantage of the favorable situation and try to defeat the enemy army using their numerical advantage. The Allies made their first attempt at a counteroffensive at the end of February 1915 in Champagne, but this attempt was extremely unsuccessful. Having lost about 50,000 soldiers in battles, they managed to advance only 460 meters. Realizing that they needed to act while the main forces of the German Empire were concentrated on the Eastern Front, the Allies launched a new offensive attempt on March 10. Four British divisions attacked enemy positions in the Artois area towards the village of Neuve-Chapelle. After 4 hours, the British managed to occupy the village, but that was where their success ended. The German army organized a counterattack that stopped the enemy's advance. Already on March 13, the British had to stop attempting an offensive. On April 5, French troops attempted an offensive in the area of the city of Saint-Mihiel. Despite the numerical advantage at the site of the attack, the French were unable to achieve a breakthrough at the front, and already on April 14 they had to stop attempting an offensive and go on the defensive. Meanwhile, Germany, despite the transfer of a significant part of the divisions to the Eastern Front, did not plan to go on the defensive, so that the initiative would not completely pass to the enemy. Back in March 1915, the German command began preparing an operation to break through the front using chemical weapons. The location chosen for the strike was the junction between the 2nd British Army and the 20th French Corps in the area of the city of Ypres. On April 22, 180 tons of chlorine were released on British positions. After the cloud of chlorine began to move towards the enemy, German infantry, equipped with gauze bandages, began to attack. The gas attack injured 15,000 British soldiers, 5,000 of whom died. The British were panicked and the road to the city of Ypres opened before the Germans, but they were unable to take advantage of their success. The fact is that they simply did not have the reserves to develop success. Therefore, very soon the gap between the British and French divisions was covered by the arriving Allied reinforcements. On May 9, 1915, the Allied army made a new attempt to attack the positions of German troops in the Artois region. The main goal of the attack was to break through the enemy's defenses, so that the war would again acquire a maneuver rather than a positional character. According to the plan, the British divisions were to advance on Neuve-Chapelle, and the French army on Arras. After powerful artillery preparation, the Allies launched an offensive, as a result of which they managed to penetrate the defenses of the German army to a distance of 4 kilometers. By May 15, the German command managed to pull up reserves to the breakthrough site, which stopped the enemy's advance, and by May 25, the Allied command was forced to stop the attacks. Already on June 16, the Allied army, having brought up reserves, resumed the offensive, but despite heavy losses it was not possible to break through the defenses of the German army, and on June 18 the offensive attempts were stopped. Nevertheless, the French command did not want to give up their plans, and throughout the summer they prepared for a new offensive, drawing up reserves and accumulating shells. A new offensive began on September 25 in Champagne. During the artillery preparation, the Allies spent about 3 million artillery shells, which allowed them to completely destroy the first line of enemy fortifications. The Allied infantry took advantage of this and managed to capture the first line of German fortifications, but they failed to storm the second line of fortifications, which was practically undamaged by artillery fire. Faced with fierce resistance from the German infantry, the Allied forces melted away, but they were unable to break through the enemy's defenses. Also on September 25, the Allies launched an offensive in the Artois area. This time, in addition to artillery preparation, the Allies carried out a gas attack on the enemy positions, but it was ineffective since the wind was weak and constantly changed direction. Nevertheless, the Allies managed to penetrate 3 kilometers into the enemy's defenses, but due to the fierce resistance of the German army, they were unable to advance further. Bloody battles in Champagne and in the Artois region continued until October 7, when the Allied command realized that the offensive had failed. The Allies went on the defensive, and the German army launched a counterattack. Both sides actively used chemical and incendiary shells. The fighting continued until October 20, but the Germans were never able to regain the positions lost during the Allied offensive. The fact that despite the numerical advantage over their opponents, the Allied command realized that they did not have enough forces to defeat the German army deserves special mention. In this situation, at the end of 1915, the French government offered the Russian government to send 400,000 Russian soldiers to the Western Front in exchange for weapons and ammunition. The Russian command agreed to the proposal of its allies, but with the proviso that troops would be sent to the Western Front gradually as new regiments were formed. At the beginning of 1916, the German command began transferring forces from the Eastern to the Western Front. The fact is that during the 1915 campaign, German divisions managed to oust the army of the Russian Empire from Poland, but the Germans failed to defeat the enemy. Nevertheless, the Austro-Hungarian army was saved from defeat. Having assessed the situation, the German command realized that the chances of winning a decisive victory on the Western Front were much higher than on the Eastern Front, so they began to transfer German divisions from the Eastern to the Western Front. Since even after the transfer of divisions from the Eastern Front, the German army on the Western Front had fewer forces than the Allies, the German command decided to abandon attempts at a large-scale offensive. Instead, the Germans planned to attack important strategic enemy positions. The target of the German army's attack was the Verdun ledge, which was the support of the French front, as well as a threat to the communications of the German army. To attack the Verdun salient, the German command concentrated 6.5 divisions, which were opposed by only 2 French divisions. Before the attack, German aviation tried to clear the sky over Verdun from enemy aircraft, but this was not possible, as the French hastily transferred additional aircraft to the Verdun area. The Verdun operation began on February 21, 1916. After many hours of artillery preparation, the German army launched an offensive on the right bank of the Meuse River, where they immediately encountered stubborn enemy resistance, which is why, following the results of the first day of the offensive, the Germans managed to advance only 2 kilometers and occupy the first defensive positions of the French army. The German army continued its offensive, gradually occupying one defensive position after another, first destroying them with artillery. By February 25, the Germans managed to occupy most of the forts of the French army, including Fort Douaumont. In turn, the French army managed to take timely measures to prevent the encirclement of the Verdun fortified area. To solve this problem, additional forces from other sectors of the front were transferred to the vicinity of Verdun with the help of 6,000 vehicles. Thanks to the use of road transport, by February 27, the French managed to deliver more than 190,000 soldiers to the vicinity of Verdun, which made it possible to create a numerical superiority over the advancing German army. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Russian army, at the request of the French command, carried out the Narek offensive operation, which forced the German command to begin an urgent transfer of divisions from the Western to the Eastern Front, thereby weakening the pressure on French defensive positions in the vicinity of Verdun. Despite the changed balance of forces, the German army continued its offensive, thanks to which by the end of May it managed to advance 7 kilometers deep into enemy territory. Soon the offensive of the German army ran out of steam. At this time, the French received reinforcements, including Russian infantry regiments. Of course, the arrival of the Russian regiments did not have a significant impact on the balance of power in the Verdun area, but it raised the morale of the French. Already on May 22, the French army launched a counteroffensive in an attempt to regain control of Fort Douaumont. The French attack was unsuccessful and they were soon driven back to their original positions. In June 1916, after a regrouping, the German army launched a new offensive. On June 7, German divisions managed to advance 1 kilometer deep into enemy positions and establish control over Fort Vaux, but soon the pressure of the German army weakened and on June 23, the German command decided to stop the offensive. Realizing that the German command had used most of its forces and reserves in the Battle of Verdun, the Allied command decided to launch an offensive on another sector of the front. Since the main forces of the French army were also involved in the Battle of Verdun, it was decided to carry out an offensive with the British army. On July 1, in Picardy, British divisions began an offensive against the positions of the German army in the Somme River area. The advancing British army was supported on the right flank by 5 French divisions. Already on the first day of the offensive, the British army suffered huge losses, about 57,000 soldiers, but did not give up trying to break through the enemy's defenses. Meanwhile, due to the Allied offensive on the Somme River, as well as the Brusilov breakthrough on the Eastern Front, the German command was forced to stop attacks on Verdun and go on the defensive on this section of the front. The Allies continued their attacks on the banks of the Somme River and on September 15, for the first time in history, the British army used tanks in battle. The infantry, supported by tanks, was able to advance only 4 kilometers into the enemy's defenses, largely due to the fact that the first tanks were extremely unreliable. In October, after a regrouping, the Allies again went on the offensive and, at the cost of huge losses, were able to advance 8 kilometers deep into the enemy's defenses, but already on November 13, heavy rains began, which forced the Allied command to stop attempting an offensive. Simultaneously with the final offensive in the Somme River area, the Allies launched an offensive in the vicinity of Verdun on October 24. Despite heavy losses, the Allies only partially managed to regain their positions, liberating Fort Douaumont and pushing the German divisions back 2 kilometers from it. The total losses of the opponents in the Battle of Verdun amounted to about 1 million people, and the battle itself did not bring any tactical results to either side. This is largely why this battle went down in history as the Verdun Meat Grinder. By the end of 1916, both sides suffered huge losses and it became obvious that neither side was able to win a decisive victory. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos.